Story 1. My friend and I were in our second year of college, and we were roommates. We had both transferred and were going into our senior year, renting an apartment for the past year. The first year, we lived with 3 other people, but they had graduated and moved out. The apartment had 2 rooms and a den with double doors that one person could use. We had 2 people in each room and 1 in the den. After they left, we needed to find new roommates. My friend knew 2 people who wanted to move in together, so she talked to them and got everything arranged before summer. This way, when fall came around, we would already have roommates lined up. We signed the lease before summer vacation, and everything seemed fine. One of the girls, who I'll call Sharon, wanted the bigger room to herself and agreed to pay full price for it. The other girl, let's call her Carrie, would stay in the den. This meant there would be just 4 of us instead of 5, which we were excited about. However, over the summer, things started to get weird. Sharon began having second thoughts about living with Carrie. Apparently, they had some issues while living together. Sharon called my friend and me, saying Carrie had pushed her down the stairs once, and that she had bought pepper spray and a taser just in case. According to Sharon, one night they thought someone was trying to break into their apartment. They were standing at the top of the stairs when Carrie told Sharon to go check it out. Sharon refused, so Carrie allegedly pushed her down the stairs. We asked Carrie about this, but she denied it. She said they did hear something suspicious and called the police, but she never pushed Sharon. My friend and I didn't know who to believe and told Sharon that they would have to work it out since she was the one having doubts. We also told her that if she changed her mind, we'd need at least a month's notice. Sharon decided to stay and live with us anyway, so we thought everything would be fine. Fall arrived, and Sharon moved in. Carrie was planning to move in a few days later, but then Sharon brought someone over to the apartment and started showing her around. She wanted a roommate and expected us to sign this new person onto the lease with an addendum, but she hadn't asked us about it beforehand. Apparently, she still didn't feel safe living with Carrie and said she'd feel better with a roommate. She even told this potential roommate she hadn't known Carrie would be living there, which was a lie since we had all signed an addendum together. At this point, my friend and I were starting to feel concerned. We had to renew our lease soon, and if we didn't sign it in time, the price would increase significantly. We couldn't afford that, and finding a new place at the start of the school year would have been almost impossible. The lease needed to be signed in a few days, but Sharon didn't want to sign it unless we added her new roommate first. We were frustrated because she had never asked us if we were okay with having someone else move in, and now she was threatening our living situation. Sharon started making more demands. She wanted me to witness a verbal agreement between her and Carrie, where Carrie would promise to sign the new person onto the lease after we signed the renewal. I told her I wasn't comfortable with that. Things were getting out of hand, and we didn't know how to handle Sharon's behavior. Sharon came up with a solution. She suggested we sign her off the lease temporarily, renew it with Carrie, and then sign her and her roommate back on later. This way, she wouldn't be stuck on the lease without her roommate. My friend and I agreed to this plan, and so did Carrie. We went to the office and told them about the situation. The office prepared an addendum to remove Sharon from the lease. Everyone needed to sign it, so my friend, Carrie, and I signed first, and then we informed Sharon that it was ready for her to sign. She went downstairs and signed herself off the lease. Once she came back, we told her we wouldn't be signing her back on. Sharon was furious. She claimed she would have signed herself off anyway if we didn't want to live with her, but we didn't believe her. She started crying and mentioned she had just finished setting up her desk, but we didn't care. She had jeopardized everyone's living situation, including her potential roommates. Sharon stormed out, slamming the door behind her. A few minutes later, she came back with a smug look on her face and handed me her phone, saying her mom wanted to talk to one of us. I put it on speaker so my friend could hear. Carrie went to her room and closed the door. Sharon's mom immediately started yelling at me. She called me a jerk and told me to go to hell. I stayed calm and told her I stood by our decision. She continued to insult me, saying Sharon had nowhere to go and that I didn't care. I agreed that I didn't. After a few more insults, she hung up. I handed the phone back to Sharon, who seemed surprised I wasn't intimidated. She whispered, "Sorry," as she took the phone and went to her room to start packing. Since Sharon had already paid rent for the month, we let her stay until the end of it, giving her about 5 days to figure something out. She made it difficult, but she eventually left. I never saw her on campus after that. The best part, Sharon's potential roommate still needed a place to stay, so we signed her onto the lease and helped her find another roommate. It took a while, but in the end, we got our apartment back. A word of advice: don't sign people onto your lease months in advance. People can change a lot in a short time, and they might not care about messing things up for you. Story 2. So, I recently quit my awful job at a well-known fast food chain with the iconic golden arches, and I remembered this story, which I thought was pretty funny. Unfortunately, this is a true story, though it seems a bit ridiculous. We had these regulars, an older couple that came through the drive-through nearly every day. I was usually the one handing food out the window. I always tried to accommodate them, making it easier to hand over their food and drinks, but their attitude toward me got worse and worse over time. For context, the branch I worked at was one of 5 in town, but the others were about 20 minutes away. Ours was the worst rated because it was a small, yet extremely busy, location. It was mostly run by teenagers, and during the lunch and dinner rushes, everything was a mess. The managers were more concerned with stats than actually running the place properly. This couple would always come during our busiest times, order the same thing, and yell at the staff, me included, about how slow we were. The kitchen couldn't keep up with how busy we got, so wait times were often over 300 seconds, though they were supposed to be under 120. Every time, they'd complain about how busy we were, how slow we were, and how unfair it was to make an elderly couple wait. The man always asked for extra cream in his latte, and if he didn't get it, he'd become furious. I would always go the extra mile to add the cream for him, just to avoid his tantrums. He even started calling me his creamy girl with a smirk on his face. I'd laugh it off, but also tell him that it wasn't appropriate. On this particular day, I was around 16 or 17 at the time. We were swamped. Wait times had hit over 600 seconds when the couple showed up. I asked them to pull into a bay so we could serve the next customer, whose order was already ready. The man lost it, refusing to move, slamming his hands on the dashboard, and throwing a full-blown tantrum. This went on for so long that I had to explain the situation to my manager, who wasn't the type to tolerate nonsense. She ended up calling the police to have him removed. Usually, the threat of police is enough to get customers to comply, but not this guy. He started shouting something like, "Every time I come here, we have to wait, and my cream melts, and every time you're the one working, you're an awful person." Now, I'm not the type to let people walk all over me, but I had been patient up until this point. While he was yelling at me, I blurted out, "So, go somewhere else. It's called problem solving, dude." He was stunned for a moment, then started ranting again, saying this was the only place he could go, and there was nothing I could do to make him leave. So, I said, "Wanna bet?" Latte with extra cream in hand, I poured the coffee all over the roof and window of his Fiat Panda. Just to clarify, I wasn't going to pour it out the window initially, but he was parked too close. I realized I could safely pour it on the car without burning him. I then calmly told him to pull around and said his order would be ready soon before slamming the window shut. Immediately after, I burst into tears from the stress and exhaustion and went to tell my manager what I had done. The police showed up almost immediately. We explained what had happened, and the man was still trying to get his window cleaned off. The officers told him to leave, and if he didn't, he'd be trespassing. Long story short, the next thing I saw was this man in his 70s swinging at a police officer before being quickly escorted to the cop car. His very frail wife sat in shock, still latte-less. Did he deserve to get arrested? Probably not. Was it right for me to pour coffee on his car? Maybe, maybe not. You can decide for yourself if I was in the wrong. Either way, it felt pretty satisfying. Oh, and by the way, I didn't lose my job. Edit. Some more details about the awful things this guy would do just to explain my reaction. He'd throw a tantrum if we were too busy to top up his extra cream. If the latte didn't have enough cream, we'd have to remake it, which could take a couple of minutes. Then, he'd complain about how long it took. He often asked me to add 5 packets of sugar to his already syrup-filled latte. I'd happily do it when we weren't busy, but I'd also remind him there were already 3 pumps of syrup in the drink. He'd then complain that it was too sweet and accuse me of adding more sugar than he asked for. Remaking the drink would follow. This wasn't the first time he refused to pull into a bay. Sometimes he did, so it wasn't that he didn't understand. But I was always happy to explain what he needed to do. Worst of all, he'd personally blame me if his service wasn't up to his standards, even if I wasn't working the drive-thru. My best friend once worked on my day off, and apparently he started yelling for the pink-haired girl to apologize for messing up his order when I wasn't even there. I know I overreacted, and I'll own up to that, but his behavior was borderline abusive. Story 3. I was visiting a friend who owns and runs a trailer park. His house also serves as the main office. A couple had just moved into one of the lots with their mobile home. The guy seemed fine, and he and his girlfriend had just welcomed their first child. Well, at 3 a.m., just a few hours after I arrived, the boyfriend knocked on my friend's door. Apparently, he had done a DNA test and found out that the kid wasn't his. While his girlfriend was still in the hospital, he decided to get back at her by fooling around with another girl. Earlier that day, his girlfriend had been released from the hospital, but he refused to pick her up. So, she walked about 20 miles back to the trailer park and found him with this other girl. She completely lost it. She started trashing their small mobile home while he and his new girl ran out of the house. He quickly drove the other girl back to her place. When he returned, his soon-to-be ex-girlfriend had locked him out of their mobile home. So, at 3 a.m., he showed up at the main office to call the police. My buddy woke me up, explained the situation, and I went out to keep the guy company. I told him that since the kid wasn't his, and if he had signed the birth certificate, he only had 60 days to get his name removed, or he'd be stuck paying child support. I also explained that even though calling the cops was a good idea, they probably wouldn't be able to remove her from the mobile home since she had already established residency. The cops showed up, knocked on the door, and she answered. They just did a welfare check on the baby and left. She eventually let him back into the mobile home. I thought that would be the end of it, but I was wrong. It was far from over. About 30 minutes after the cops left, the guy came back to the main office, saying he needed to call the police again because his girlfriend had stolen his car. According to him, she had even tried to run him over before speeding off into the night. Before the police could get back, she returned and started doing donuts in my buddy's yard. She ran over his garden and tore up the yard in the process. The cops arrived just as she stopped. They got out of their cars and arrested her on the spot. The charge? Misdemeanor malicious mischief for ruining my friend's garden. That was it. A day passed, and she was released on bond. She came right back to the mobile home and started fighting with her boyfriend again. During the argument, she scratched her own throat until it left a noticeable mark. She called the cops and claimed he had hit her. The police came and arrested him for domestic violence. They took the baby into protective custody. I know for a fact she made up the story because after the cops left, she bragged about it. She even called the guy's parents to boast about getting their son locked up. My friend started to panic. Now, he had a crazy woman on his property. She had no income, and she had just gotten her only source of income her boyfriend locked up and fired. There was no way they were going to pay rent anytime soon. But legally, he couldn't evict her because they weren't past due on rent yet. Another day went by, and the boyfriend was still in jail. The crazy lady had started throwing all of their belongings into the yard, some of which landed on my buddy's property. He told her she needed to clean it up by 6 p.m., or he'd write her a violation. She ignored him. Later, I was helping my buddy move some bricks in his backyard, which was right next to their lot. The entire time, she was yelling to herself, not in a normal way, either. She was shouting things like, "Minimum wage, and they fired me. $10.75 an hour, and they fired me. And, I just want to enjoy my life, but they won't let me. I'll end them." We decided it was best to leave her alone and went inside for lunch. That's when we saw the smoke. This crazy lady had piled up her stuff and set it on fire on my friend's property, not even her own lot. My buddy called the cops, and they arrived along with the fire department. They found her standing there with a lighter and a can of gasoline. She had the water running and tried to turn it off, but the cops stopped her. My buddy turned off the water for her mobile home instead. She screamed at him for doing it, even though the cops told him it was fine. The fire was put out, and the cops put her in handcuffs. I thought she'd finally get arrested for arson, but no. The fire marshal refused to investigate, so it couldn't be classified as arson. She got a citation and was released. My buddy then asked the cops if he could press charges for trespassing since she started the fire on his property. The cops said they couldn't because she needed to know she was trespassing. So, my buddy had the officer explain to her exactly where her property ended and told her not to set foot on his land again. As the cops left, she looked at us and said, "You're lucky I don't bash your heads in with a baseball bat. I'm going to take you out." The cops had their windows down, but they didn't do anything. They just left. An hour later, she was standing in the middle of the street, stopping cars. Finally, one driver let her use their phone to call the police. She wanted them to arrest my friend for turning off her water, even though the cops had ordered him to do it. Since she was standing on his property to make the call, my buddy recorded her on his phone and then called the cops. When the police arrived, they arrested her immediately. The same cop who had been there earlier watched the video and told my buddy that he wasn't arresting her for trespassing. Instead, he was issuing an emergency detention. She was taken to the hospital for evaluation, but would be released the same day. After the cops left, my friend called the boyfriend's parents. They had the only key to the mobile home since the police gave it to them when the boyfriend was arrested. They came over, locked up the home, and left. My friend noticed a water leak coming from the valve, so he briefly turned off the water to the park, cut the pipe, and capped it off to stop the leak. Remember how he warned her to clean up the yard? Well, she didn't. She threw everything from the mobile home into the yard. As written in the rental agreement, my friend cleaned the yard for her. He hauled everything off to the dump, wrote her a violation, and billed her for the cleanup. That evening, we had plans to grill for dinner, so we invited the boyfriend's parents over for a meal and a show. Crazy lady came back after dark. She hadn't even noticed her yard was empty yet, and when she saw us sitting on the patio, she started shouting insults. We laughed, knowing what was about to happen. After she finished her rant, she walked to the mobile home, only to find her yard empty and a notice on the door. When she tried to open the door, it was locked. It finally hit her. She screamed, "You jerks!" and went to the water hose, but the water was off. She then tried to turn the water back on, only to find it capped off. My buddy yelled out, "Sorry, there was a water leak at the valve. I'll have it fixed in about 2 weeks." Coincidentally, 2 weeks was the earliest time he could start the eviction process. Story 4. This happened about 6 months ago. For some background, I work for a parking company that manages the parking lots at a large university. My job is as a dispatcher, meaning I handle communication between departments, help field staff, and assist people who get stuck in garages or need help in parking lots. I used to work the 3 p.m. to 11 p.m. shift, and customer service left at 6:30 p.m. So I sometimes got customer service calls I couldn't handle, but did my best for polite people. The university collects all the money from parking citations, and if students don't pay, they get an academic hold, which means no transcripts, no graduation, no class registration, and no access to campus resources. This is how I ended up talking to the entitled mom Karen in this story. I got a call from a lady at around 8 p.m. Me. Hello, parking company dispatch office. How may I help you? Karen. Hello, sir. I was wondering if you could help me with something. Let me say, she was very polite, but also very chatty. Me. Sure, ma'am, I'll do my best. What seems to be the issue? Here's where the details come in because she went on for a while. Her son had parked in a handicap space and had been put on academic hold for not paying a $370 fine. Apparently, her son was a third-string player on the university's football team. Management had worked with her and placed the citation under a secondary appeal, which temporarily lifted the hold for some things but not all. She explained all this to me and finally got to the real issue after about 6 minutes of talking. I later found out the dispute was over the fact that the enforcement officer hadn't taken a picture of the car and the handicap sign in the same shot. Still, based on the other photos, we knew it was the correct spot. Karen. So, my son went down yesterday to pick up his family tickets for the game, but they wouldn't let him because of the hold on his account. I thought it was supposed to be lifted. I pulled up her son's account and almost laughed because his last name was so close to the villain from Shrek, Lord Farquaad. Me. I'm sorry about that, ma'am. As a dispatcher, I don't handle those details, but I do see the hold has been lifted. I'm not sure why he couldn't get his tickets. I can email our customer service manager about this, and she can look into it tomorrow morning. Karen. Oh, do you mean? She absolutely butchered the pronunciation of the Swedish manager's name, making it sound French somehow. Me. No, ma'am. I'm not familiar with that name. What has he helped you with? Karen. He's the one who placed the appeal on the citation. Me. Oh, you mean? I corrected her pronunciation. Yes, that's his department. I can CC him on the email if you'd like. Karen. Oh, I'm so sorry. I only ever spoke with him through email. Could you please notify him as well? Me laughing a bit. That's perfectly all right, ma'am. I'll write up the email as soon as we finish this call. Anything else I can help you with tonight? Karen. No, thank you so much for your help. Me. Not a problem, ma'am. You have a wonderful evening. Usually, when people call in with non-dispatch issues, they get annoyed when I can't help. But this lady was so nice, so I made sure to put extra effort into that email. I sent it off, and the rest of the night was quiet. The next day, as soon as I came in, managers A and B were waiting to talk to me about this lady. Turns out she was the kindest entitled mom we had ever encountered. She used all the classic lines like, "My son couldn't have done this," and "He's such a good boy," but in the sweetest way possible. It was mind-blowing how nice she was, even though she wouldn't stop talking. We later found out that her son couldn't pick up family tickets because of the academic hold, even if it was under appeal. Things were quiet until her son, the entitled kid, struck again about a month later. I got a call from a client who hired security for an off-campus garage we manage. Apparently, someone had run over and destroyed one of those state law pedestrian crossing signs, and they had the license plate number. I took down the info and looked it up after we hung up. My jaw hit the desk. It was entitled Kid Farquaad. I got excited because we now had video proof of entitled kid being reckless. The next day, I went over to the Swedish customer service manager and asked if he remembered entitled kid. He gave me an annoyed yes. So, I told him that security at the off-campus garage caught entitled kid on video wrecking the crossing sign. His jaw dropped just like mine had. The manager quickly got on the phone with security to get the footage. Now, he's not someone who has worked in the field, but I have. I know exactly how much those signs cost, around $330 or more, just for the sign. When I showed him the price, he giggled like a kid. A few days later, I followed up. Entitled kid had initially denied doing anything to the sign, but when we told him there was video, he admitted it, but claimed the sign only cost $20, and that was all he was going to pay. The manager then emailed him an official quote, $500 for parts and labor. It was that high because the sign had been anchored with steel cables, which entitled kid had snapped. The cables had to be re-drilled and remounted, driving up the cost. What did entitled kid do? He ran to his mom. Karen tried her usual charm, but the manager, tired of her antics, told her we had video evidence and would press charges for property damage. That would ruin entitled kid's football career. Within 10 minutes, entitled kid had set up a payment plan for both the $370 handicap citation and the $204 for destroying the sign. The manager was being nice, which I thought was too generous. And that's how entitled kid finally faced the consequences for his actions, thanks to a little video proof. Story 5. We recently sold our house at an auction, and the couple who bought it turned out to be rude and entitled. We were meticulous in preparing the sale documents, providing full details of all the renovation work we had completed. Since the open house period overlapped with public holidays, we had more inspection times than usual and even opened the house privately for some interested buyers. There was plenty of opportunity for everyone to check things out. The auction went fine, but the first sign of trouble appeared afterward. The couple took nearly 2 hours to sign the contract. It was explained to them that the sale was unconditional, meaning they couldn't pull out for any reason without losing their deposit. They also couldn't request a building or pest inspection and use the results as an excuse to back out and get their deposit refunded. These inspections are supposed to be done before the purchase, especially at an auction. Unlike a private sale, auctions have different rules. In the following days, the real estate agent bombarded us with texts and calls on behalf of the couple, asking questions about the property. What are the roof tiles made of? When was the last roof cleaning? What material is the deck made of? Have the solar panel storage batteries been checked? When was the air conditioning serviced? We answered the questions, but it quickly became irritating. We told the agents that most of this information was either in the advertisement or the building report and should have been discussed before the purchase. It became clear that the couple were wealthy investors from another country and had likely bought the house based solely on the photos. The couple then demanded a building inspection, which our conveyancer strongly advised against. If they found any reason to back out, they would lose their deposit, but we'd be left without funds for the settlement of our new house. We had no legal obligation to allow this, so I firmly said no. The agents kept pushing for a week, but I told them to drop it. Next, the couple asked to move up the settlement date. While we didn't mind, the lady from whom we were buying our new house was not okay with it. To make the money work, we needed to settle both properties on the same day. Moving up the date would mean we'd have to pay for a hotel for a few weeks, which we couldn't afford, so we had to say no. This upset the couple because they had to pay extra rent where they were living. We apologized, but it was out of our hands. The agents tried pressuring us again, but we stood firm. Another flood of questions followed, which we answered. Then, they asked which furniture we were willing to sell. Given the trouble they'd caused, we decided not to sell anything. Next, they requested a pre-settlement inspection. Normally, this is done 7 days before settlement to ensure nothing included in the contract, like curtains or fixtures, had been removed. They wanted it 15 days out. We suggested they come closer to the settlement date when the house would be empty, but they refused. We eventually agreed to their early inspection, but made it clear the house wasn't in its final condition yet, and they were agreeing to settle as is once we removed our belongings. They agreed in writing. On the day of the inspection, we had an old couch sitting by the curb for hard rubbish collection. It was completely torn up by our cats, and not even the neighborhood scavengers wanted it. The couple were clearly upset we didn't sell them the furniture and accused us of dumping trash on their property. We reminded them that the property wasn't theirs yet and showed them the booking slip for the collection. During the inspection, we drove around the block and parked nearby. We watched them bring someone onto the property, who we suspected was a builder, without our permission. Unfortunately, we couldn't prove it. The weekend before settlement, we were packing our storage containers. We took a short break and sat inside with the front door and container door open. Suddenly, we heard people walking around by our containers. I jumped up and saw a group of builders measuring our fence. I asked them what they were doing, and they said they were told no one would be there and that they had permission. I snapped and told them they were trespassing and had no right to be there. They ignored me and said they'd be done in a minute. I firmly told them no and insisted they leave. They started walking toward me, getting into my personal space in a threatening way. I'm a woman, under 5 feet tall, and I guess they thought I was an easy target. At that point, they noticed my husband, who is tall and large, walking toward them. They quickly retreated to their car. I called the agents and my conveyancer, furious, and said I'd call the police if they were seen again. The couple denied sending them. The day of settlement arrived, and everything went smoothly with the money. We handed over the keys, relieved that the ordeal was finally over. But it wasn't. We received an angry email from the couple's conveyancer, claiming we left items on the property and that it wasn't in fit condition for settlement. They also complained that, because they had inspected early, they couldn't check everything properly. We reminded them they had agreed in writing to the condition of the house. They attached pictures of the items they wanted removed. It was a single bag of rubbish we had accidentally left in the shed, along with spare fence pickets and roof tiles we had left as a courtesy. Fine, we said, we'd come and get it. We had to get permission to go back on the property since it wasn't ours anymore. My husband went to pack up everything shown in the photo. The new owners freaked out and demanded he leave everything except the bag of rubbish. He refused until they put it in writing, which they begrudgingly did. They asked for the fence pickets and all the spare roof and bathroom tiles. Then, my husband took the paint cans we had left for touch-ups. They demanded he leave those too, but refused to put that in writing, so he took them along with the snail pellets we had left. The garden had a massive snail problem, but now they could pay to fix it themselves. In the end, all they really wanted gone was the bag of rubbish and some decorative steel panels at the back of the house, which were part of the contract. They made a fuss to inconvenience us because of the earlier builder incident. The icing on the cake, they demanded my husband change the alarm code for them. He told them no, that it wasn't his responsibility, and that he'd left detailed instructions on how to do it themselves. They claimed they couldn't figure it out. He shrugged and told them to call a technician. In contrast, when we moved into our new home, the previous owner left a handwritten letter explaining how everything worked, menus from her favorite takeout spots, and her number in case we had any questions. She left us spare light bulbs, electrical parts, fittings, and even spare floorboards, which we were thrilled about since we planned to replace the old carpet. We even found some of her handwritten recipes and cookbooks. We texted her to say thanks and offered to return her books. She was so grateful. That's how it should have been. But the people we sold to were just awful. If they had been nicer, we would have left them a note of our own, warning them about the right-hand neighbor who has no sense of social boundaries and has severe pest issues. His property is like a jungle, and he doesn't maintain it, so they're in for a surprise with rodents, ticks, spiders, ants, snakes, and foxes. We also would have told them about the left-hand neighbor, who we were pretty sure was involved in illegal activities, with suspicious visitors at all hours and a habit of constantly cleaning his truck. Looking back, the place wasn't great to begin with, and it got worse over the years. I guess karma caught up with them. I hope they enjoy it.